Broadcasting from our New England studio, Solutions Review is proud to showcase Concentric AI in the Solution Spotlight, an inside look at enterprise technologies.
I'm Doug Atkinson here at Solutions Review, and welcome to the Solution Spotlight featuring Concentric AI and focused on modern data security in the generative AI era. Enterprises have an abundance of sensitive data that they need to identify, classify, protect, and manage. However, this data is distributed across on-premises and cloud environments and is typically rife with undiscovered and shadow data. The velocity of this data, along with new use cases like generative AI tools, make data security governance more complex than ever. So today, we are presenting a conversation between Todd Thiemann, Senior Analyst at Enterprise Strategy Group, and Karthik Krishnan, Founder and CEO of Concentric AI, on how data security posture management and modern data security governance enable enterprises to remove risk and cut costs to operate more efficiently.
Hello, my name is Todd Thiemann. I'm a Senior Analyst with Enterprise Strategy Group looking at data security as well as identity security. I have the pleasure of being here today with Karthik Krishnan, who's the CEO of Concentric AI, talking about data security governance and data security posture management. Karthik, could you take a moment to introduce yourself to the audience?
Nice to be here, Todd. My name is Karthik Krishnan. I am the founder and CEO of Concentric AI. We are a next generation data security governance company.
Fantastic. Thanks for that. So let me set the stage for what's going to be a super informative discussion, I expect. We're going to be discussing modern data security and data security posture management. DSPM, data security posture management in particular, has been an exciting topic as enterprises recognize how much they don't understand about the posture of their sensitive data, the location of that sensitive data, the enterprise data stores, both on-premises and in the cloud. Now, as an analyst at Enterprise Strategy Group, Enterprise Strategy Group is known for rigorous surveying of the market. We recently published some research around data resilience, which is sort of the intersection of data governance, data security posture management, data security, as well as data protection. And what we wanted to do is how enterprises were approaching this topic and this problem generally, as well as DSPM specifically. So we're on the same page around data security posture management, or DSPM. Let me just give you a brief introduction. At its core, DSPM comprises the technology and processes to continuously monitor and assess an organization's security controls across all their environments, on-prem, cloud. DSPM discovers and categorizes those data stores to identify weaknesses, prioritize risks, and ensure that data remains protected from evolving threats. Now, given the dynamism of data, how it changes, how it occurs, sort of gets created, DSPM is an ongoing process and not a one and done thing. Now, we asked about what was motivating enterprises to look at a DSPM, to consider it, and you can see the result on your screen. The top two reasons that were there were data breach prevention. I don't want to get breached. I need to know where everything is, need to discover it, as well as facilitating generative AI deployments and the data that informs those deployments. Now, there are a host of other things that were driving DSPM, and you can see those here, including data governance, which was the number 3 one there. But those were the main two. Now, these provide some specific use cases, and let me pivot to use cases. Enterprises want to solve specific problems. They don't buy tools just in the abstract, I need this tool. They're specific problems that they want to solve. Karthik, you're regularly talking to CISOs, CIOs, data governance leaders. What are you seeing as the primary use cases for data security governance and DSPM?
Yeah, I think if you look at data security in general, Todd, the four pillars of what you'd like to accomplish in an effective data security program are discover, know what it is, know where all of your sensitive data is. Once you've discovered that, the second pillar is to be able to monitor, to understand where there is risk to this information from things like inappropriate people getting access to that data or data sitting in locations that you least expect to find it. And once you have a risk oriented view into where there's material risk against your sensitive data, the third part is remediation, and to be able to make sure that you're able to take proactive steps to mitigate and prevent data loss, which is a primary requirement per your survey as well. And the last part is, of course, if you have any sort of a post-breach situation, to be able to investigate. Now, the primary use case, which is the core use case for data security posture management, is the desire to locate your information, to be able to categorize that, and take action to prevent data security posture. And primarily, it's been classification as a primary use case. That's kind of been the core data security posture management or DSPM use case. However, I think what we're seeing also is people are evolving that into more a broader requirement for data security governance, where there are adjacent use cases around data access governance. How do I make sure that only the right sets of people have access to my data, or AI-enabled data leakage prevention, where I'm using data security governance tools to infuse that intelligence across my entire infrastructure to make sure that data, as it traverses across my environment, there's some sanctity to the sensitive data to make sure that only the right sets of people have access to it. And increasingly now, securing generative AI, as generative AI tools are more broadly getting adopted within the enterprise, making sure that you're able to put the effective guardrails around your key data, and then making sure that you've got an intelligent permissions management structure that allows for sensitive data and the permissions and so on to be able to be honored as generative AI is leveraging that information and disseminating that to the broader audience.
Very, very good. Very good. Yeah, very cool. Now, let's drill down on generative AI and large language models for a moment. Gen AI is of keen interest to enterprises. There are projects across the board that are going to it, but it's a huge topic that has many different layers. You have co-pilots and from Microsoft and others. You have custom models. You have RAG infrastructure, retrieval augmented generation infrastructure. All this is ripe for data loss. Now, I'm aware of one enterprise that had deployed Microsoft Copilot, and an employee found out through that, putting in their name, that there's a layoff list and they were on it. That at its root was a data classification problem. That data should not have been informing that Copilot. There's no sort of one ring to rule them all. If you look at J.R. Tolkien sort of references, no single Uber solution when it comes to securing Gen AI infrastructure. It's sort of a many-layered cake. Karthik, could you share your perspective on securing that Gen AI infrastructure?
Yeah, so generative AI as a productivity tool, as enterprises are starting to deploy these, there are a whole host of security issues on the back end. Starting with the fact that as these tools are leveraging the information that's available within your environment, they're going to assume that all of that information is suitable for public consumption, which means exactly like you said. If an employee were to ask a question like, "Hey, how much and how are we doing this quarter revenue wise?" It's going to tap into all of the resources that are available, whether it's sensitive, non-sensitive, public, not public, and you leverage that as part of its knowledge base to be able to disseminate the most accurate picture to that employee. Now, not every employee requires the same level of access. no different from how traditional access control has worked within the environments. And so if your executives were to ask a question, the level of information that they probably need access to has to be at a different level compared to maybe an employee who joined 2 days ago who's a junior employee. And how do you make sure that generative AI rollout, while it's enabling productivity for your employees, is also making sure that the sensitivity and the guardrails are there around the data that you care about to make sure that permissions are honored, classification is honored. In fact, we had a hedge fund where the CEO mandated a Gen AI rollout for all of the employees, and the CISO basically said, "Look, I need to get my data governance program in place. I need to classify the data. I need to put a good permission structure around my sensitive data, or else I'm just looking at a data leakage, data spill waiting to happen." And so, literally in 10 days. We went from initial engagement to the customer purchasing our product to be able to secure their Gen AI rollout. And interesting angle here is we happen to be a tool that actually uses Gen AI to protect Gen AI because we use language models and Gen AI on the front end to understand data with context. So we can help customers understand where all of their financial data is, intellectual property, business confidential data, even things like PII, PCI, PHI. And we're doing that using generative AI and language models and deep learning models. And so the angle here is how do you use next generation data security governance tools to be able to put the effective permission structure, classification structure around your sensitive data, and then also classify its output, because the output also comes out where there could be sensitive information sitting within the output itself. And so how do you make sure that you're putting the appropriate guardrails and fencing around your data so that employees can continue to be productive while making sure that your information that is sensitive stays sensitive?
Yeah, that's an important nuance. There's security for Gen AI, which is what Concentric AI does, but there's also using generative AI in your solution to make it more effective. You also do that. So it's an important nuance to understand. Now, the ESG research on data resilience probed on how enterprises were approaching that challenge. And one question we asked was around deployments. Now, if you're a practitioner, you might be curious about how your peers are looking about deployments of DSPM, and I have a treat for you. The research showed that there was a wave of DSPM adoption happening. There are a number of enterprises that said, hey, we've deployed this, but the bulk of enterprises said, this is something we plan to go to town with, that we plan to deploy in the next 12 to 24 months. We also asked those that had deployed or were in pilot how long they expected the deployment to take. And when you scan your data, quickly understanding security issues, it takes some time to operationalize that with a combination of people, process, technology. The technology piece, that's one thing, and you can see some immediate, things you can do or action you can take. But in terms of operationalizing that DSPM, that's another thing. And we wanted to understand how long that initial phase took. It requires establishing policies for sensitive data across the organization. It involves many constituents. And then you have to go and operationalize that. It's locating and categorizing and taking action to improve the security posture of that data. What came back was that initial phase took 4 to 6 months on average. And from my analyst perspective, I know that some technologies are easier to deploy than others. So I expect the technology that you're using has some sway on how quickly you can operationalize things. Now, Karthik, Concentric AI has a bunch of deployments under your belt. What are you seeing in terms of those deployment dynamics?
Yeah, so the challenges that we heard from customers from day one when they're looking to operationalize data security is one, it puts a tremendous burden on customers. In fact, I remember one CISO even telling me he was spending $5 on people for every dollar in solution cost just to operationalize. And often just because of the fact that you have to do so much work up front. You have to write all these rules and patterns, and you've got to go talk to the business units and understand what data they would like to protect. And all of these policies require you to have an a priori understanding of what is important, not important, which makes it very, very difficult. And even then, you're then inundated with a bunch of false positives, false negatives, and you're left just trying to find a way in which those risk insights you're getting are actionable. Because it's no use if in the act of finding one risk insight, you're getting 20 false positives that you're wading through. It just puts a tremendous burden on your security staff just to be able to operationalize. And so a core principle that we realized is systems have to be somewhat autonomous in giving customers the visibility into their environment, without necessarily requiring a tremendous, large team to basically be able to deploy. And the other thing is, how quickly can you stand up and demonstrate value? Can you, in fact, we used to hear from customers that, hey, I would write all these patterns, I would scan the data, and then suddenly we're looking for new data, and I have to go write new patterns, and I've got to go rescan a petabyte of data that may have taken me months to operationalize, and now I'm looking at another 6 months to basically be able to rescan. So the core philosophies are: how can you be somewhat autonomous in making sure that customers understand and get value into their into kind of where there's risk without them having large staff. And then also, how can you enable a solution where you're not in this sort of rescan hell where you have to keep rescanning your data every 3-6 months?
And that can run up a bill too.
That absolutely can run up a bill, not to mention the amount of time. And so what we have found is, because of the way we use generative AI models, we can often discover data with context. And a lot of the context extraction that we do is extremely rich up front, to where you don't have to necessarily rescan the data. We've captured a lot of the context up front to where any new information you're looking for often will allow you to extract those insights without having to essentially go in and rescan the data, costing you both time and money. Now, at the end of the day, technology still is only as successful as the vision that customers have. And so what we have found is customers are successful when they have clear outcomes in mind. For example, we had a tech company. Their use case was very clear. It was around intellectual property that employees were sharing with their own personal email. And it was an insider risk use case. They had no visibility into where all of their intellectual property was. But more importantly, they wanted to make sure that they tied it to a tangible outcome where you're detecting proactively situations where these violations were happening, and then taking mitigative steps to make sure that those situations were remediated. Or another customer for whom it's all around export control data. Extremely sensitive. It's an oil and gas customer. They had to make sure that export control data cannot be accessed by unauthorized people or cannot be downloaded. And so they wanted extremely tight controls around the data that they cared about. We had another chemical manufacturer for whom it was all around making sure that we were classifying all of the records so that as these records were traversing out of the environment, they wanted to make sure that data tagged and classified as internal wasn't being shared outside the company. And so if you have clear outcomes in mind around the things that you care about, that you want to put some protective controls around, then it makes for an effective deployment and a very, very satisfactory outcome.
And what that brings to mind or brings to the fore also is the relationship between data loss prevention, DLP on the one side, and DSPM. They're sort of two sides of the same coin. DSPM is discovering, categorizing that sensitive data across your environment when it's at rest. DLP is data in motion, making sure something that's sensitive doesn't go out inadvertently. What do you see as the relationship between DLP and DSPM today? And how do you see that evolving in the future?
Yeah, it's a very, at the end of the day, if you zoom out, independent of all of the industry acronyms, people want what people want is fairly straightforward. They want to be able to understand their business critical data. They want to make sure that they're able to proactively identify risk against it. And they want to be able to take the remediation actions to make sure that unauthorized people don't get access to this information. And that risk can come from data being accessible to people that shouldn't have access to data. It could come from data sitting in locations where it can place it at risk. It can come from somebody emailing something outside the company that allows for sensitive information to go out. So you just want to be able to identify all of the dimensions. But fundamentally, everything starts with understanding your data. And so given DSPM tools are extremely good at being able to give you a good understanding of all of your data and where the risk is at, DSPM almost makes DLP possible. In fact, we have customers today. You have a Fortune 500 chemical manufacturer for whom the use case was AI-enabled DLP. They wanted all of their cloud data classified and tagged accordingly, so that as this data, whether the data gets link shared or emailed across the infrastructure, the right sets of controls are there around the data to make sure that users can't do stupid things or end up leaking information that shouldn't go out. And so in many cases, DSPM makes DLP possible. Now, DSPM tools, as they become data security governance tools, are subsuming more and more DLP capabilities in the platform. For example, there's a lot of DLP at-rest capabilities for things like permissions management, data migration that ordinarily get subsumed. Like, for example, with Concentric AI, you can do very granular permissions management. So you can manage, for example, you can set up the rules that says, hey, here's wire transfer data with PCI information in it. Regardless of where it is within your environment, make sure that only certain sets of users and groups have access to that information, and we can go ahead and enforce that policy. The other aspect that is sort of
and that's sort of almost getting into data access governance land. As you know, as an analyst, I get paid for these acronyms, so I got to throw in these acronyms. But just joking there.
That's absolutely correct. That gets into data access governance, and a little more sort of nuanced use case that I'll throw out to you. We had a customer for whom stale data was one of their biggest risks. They had duplicate data, stale data that within their environment, should it end up getting leaked out through primary storage, was like a huge risk surface for them. So this customer ended up almost reducing 30% of their data from active storage, data that was stale, redundant, that really wasn't required to be in primary storage off of their primary and moved it to secondary and backup. The end result for them, they saved $250,000 per year on their cyber liability insurance as a result of the insurance providers recognizing the significant risk reduction that they were able to do as a result of a lot of this sort of data migration, data management. So it's another use case around DLP and risk reduction that data security governance tools have the ability to be able to provide, which is one more use case beyond just data access governance, gets into actual data management.
There's probably also sort of operational cost savings when you move that off to cold storage too. Now, something that a lot of practitioners struggle with is around data discovery. For many practitioners out there, that data discovery process is broken. What could you share with us some of the best practices you see around data discovery to accelerate getting value out of DSPM?
Yeah. So look, in the end, from a customer standpoint, the reason data discovery has been broken is because it has often required customers to do a lot of upfront work, right? For example, you're writing patterns for CUI or social security numbers, looking for 9-digit patterns or fixed patterns, which really makes it a fairly error-prone exercise because you're looking for something with no context, right? A 9-digit number could be a phone number, and that's why even today, after 2 decades of DLP and data access governance tools, even a simple act of discovering a sensitive number remains just a massive problem for enterprises, because in the act of finding one, you're going to find 10 false positives, and now you've got an army of people basically deployed ahead to go in and clean up and figure out which ones are real and which ones are not. Now, if I were to hand, for example, a human a document and tell you, hey, is this a social security number or not? A human would be extremely good at being able to figure out which 9-digit numbers are social security numbers and which ones aren't. And the reason that they're able to do that is because of context. You're able to actually eyeball this document and figure out, okay, you know roughly what it's talking about. You're able to place the number in context, and that's what you're doing. And whereas traditional approaches have often taken the opposite tack, which is relying on specific patterns. And so today, in my view, generative AI tools are a very compelling answer to that, because you go away from looking at patterns to actually developing semantic meaning.
You're going beyond regex to doing something more powerful.
That's correct. And the benefit of that is you're not just discovering PII, PCI. You can actually discover, for example, sensitive output. Like you can discover, legal forms, you can discover M&A documents, intellectual property, financial data, because you're now developing meaning allows you to build out a more comprehensive inventory of all of your sensitive data that goes beyond just regexes and patterns.
Makes sense. Now, when I'm in conversation with practitioners, one of the things that regularly comes up is compliance obligations. And they might have compliance obligations today. Maybe it's HIPAA, maybe it's PCI, maybe it's FFIEC regulations, what have you. And there are also compliance obligations that are expected in the future. And then you also have things like SEC breach notification, where you have to quickly, if you're breached, understand what's going on so you can inform who needs to be informed promptly and accurately. Because if you don't do it accurately, you might need to go out 2 or 3 times to correct what you put out if you got it wrong that first time. How can data security governance help enterprises meet those obligations, the compliance obligations they might have today, as well as what they expect to have to comply with in the future?
The complicated world of data security now, the data environment, has made compliance a massive challenge, because now you're talking about data that is sitting on premises, that's in the cloud, that could be in structured environments, unstructured environments. And from a compliance standpoint, you have to be able to demonstrate to the auditors that only the right sets of people had access to the sensitive data of concern. And especially as you start thinking about the cloud, you have to fundamentally rethink your compliance strategy, because your traditional approaches where you'd be looking at, you would place your sensitive data in a folder or a location, and you would monitor that folder and make sure that only the right sets of people had access to that information. In the cloud, you can now right-click, link share, and somebody halfway around the world has access to information that you didn't even know was actually happening. And so compliance obligations have become very tricky, where instead of starting from locations and folder locations and path locations, you have to start with the data itself. So for example, you have to understand if you're looking at, for example, financial data, and if you're a financial services company, or if you're looking at PHI data as a healthcare company to satisfy HIPAA, you have to know where all of your PHI data is across your environment, and who has access to it, who is accessing it, and make sure that only the right sets of people have access to it, but also to be able to demonstrate to your auditors come audit time that you were in full compliance with those rules. And there's also sort of an operational challenge, which is you have to take all these HIPAA rules and HIPAA controls, map them to specific data security rules, and then understand where there's risk, where you're in compliance, where you're not, so you can actually proactively remediate and make that process more straightforward. And so with Concentric AI, for example, we have a compliance manager where we have mapped hundreds of controls for specific data security rules, and within that environment, being able to map it to where there's risk, how much of that data is in compliance, how much of it is in not compliance, and as remediation rules are enacted, to be able to then take that meaningful path forward to demonstrating compliance. So come audit time, it's become a straightforward exercise where you can go back to your auditors and say, hey, for all of these controls, here's ways in which we can demonstrate that this data is in compliance across a very complicated landscape. And that starts from the fact that we are sort of taking a data out approach, where instead of taking a location-centric approach, we're going to the data itself and saying, hey, here's all of your data, here's the risk, here's all the remediation actions that you can take. And by the way, this and once you've taken that, you can demonstrate through rich reports that you're actually in compliance.
That's super cool. That's sort of a compliance easy button for DSPM. Let me ask you another question that frequently comes up when I'm talking to practitioners, and that is, what should they look for in a DSPM solution? So let me ask you, Karthik, what should a security team, a CIO, a data protection officer look for when it comes to a data security governance solution or a DSPM solution?
Yeah, I'll map it to the framework that I laid out, right, which is discover, monitor, protect, investigate. So let's start with discovery. Can a good solution discover just PII, PCI data with effectiveness, or can it actually discover other forms of sensitive data that you have? Things like financial data, intellectual property, business confidential data, and all of this without placing a burden on you, right? It shouldn't require you to go in, do rule sets, require you to provide the solution with good and bad data sets, require you to train it on site. Can it actually work autonomously in providing you with an accurate discovery engine that is comprehensive across all of the different types of sensitive data that you care about? Can it do that for structured data, unstructured data, on premises, cloud? Can it look at your messaging application? So what is the coverage that it can actually provide across your environment? Now, once it's discovered this data, can it give you a risk-oriented view into your environment also autonomously? Can it tell you, for example, hey, here's data that's shared outside the company that probably shouldn't be shared, or data that's been incorrectly classified by your end users, or data that's, for example, in a location that you should not expect to find data of this particular type? And so can it provide out-of-the-box risk insights that don't require you to go in and statically define and create policies to look for specific things? So that's around the sort of monitoring side. The third part on remediation, is it just a classification engine, or can it do more for you? Can it remediate permissions? Can it fix entitlements? Can it move data to the right location? Can it delete it? Can it archive it? Can it copy it? So what sort of remediation capabilities can the solution provide? And the last aspect is, can it do this without putting burden on your staff? I mean, we have Fortune 500 customers today for whom we're managing petabytes of data, where the customer doesn't have a single full-time resource on staff. I know it's hard to believe, but that's actually true. And so that's the level at which operationalizing data security has traditionally been a last mile problem. Customers have, it's put a tremendous burden on customers to have to put large armies of people to have to operationalize the solutions and still get poor value. At the end of the day, it shouldn't be that hard. How can you discover, monitor, protect this data across your cloud, on-premises data, structured, unstructured data, without requiring a large team? I would say these are the things that security teams and companies should be looking at as they're evaluating and looking for next generation data security governance solutions.
That's a great way to sort of conclude and wrap things up. It was some great suggestions, and it's fortunate because we are bumping up against time. Thank you to the audience for watching, and thank you, Karthik, for sharing your knowledge and experience. If you want to request a demo or learn more about Concentric AI, data security posture management, data governance, and the platform required for data security, do visit concentric.ai. Thank you, and have a great day.
Well, there you have it, another solution in our spotlight. We want to thank Todd and Karthik and Concentric AI for that presentation, and we appreciate your attendance as well. Until next time, I'm Doug Atkinson here at Solutions Review. Thanks for watching.
If your business would like to be featured in a future event, contact us today.